What up, guys? Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you at. Welcome to the Boxing Republic. This is a podcast where we discuss the latest and most current events in boxing, the hottest topics. Um, this is the first episode. I'd like to welcome you guys to the first episode, and I'm glad you tuning in, you listening. In this podcast, the first episode, we want to really talk about Brian Castano versus Jermell Charlo. And before we get into it, it's a disclaimer, right? Some things that I want to get out the way right away. I do believe that the fight is a robbery. If you don't think that the fight was a robbery, if you think that the fight was a draw, etc., this podcast is not for you. This episode, shall I say, is not for you. And unless you want this to be just an exercise in you being upset, you don't have to tune into this episode. This is more so for the fans who feel like they saw the same thing that I saw, and just generally what a lot of people felt they saw on that night. Whether it's just people that watch the fight, fans, people on Twitter, or professional fighters that commentated or offered their commentary on the fight. A lot of people feel Castano won this fight. I feel Castano won this fight pretty clearly. It's not just that. It's also that Charlo did not win the fight. Also, Charlo did not draw the fight. Charlo was not the better man on that night. That's all this is about. It's not about how you feel about Charlo, how you appreciate Charlo's story. It's about who was the better man on that night. Now let's get into who was the better man on that night. Punch stats, if they count for something, or stats, statistics, or facts, if they count for something. Castano won the fight statistically, okay? So let's get into the statistics, okay? So Charlo landed 98 of his power punches, whereas Castano landed 164. That is the main statistic that I am focusing on. Castano landed 41% of his power punches. Charlo landed 39%. So Castano landed on a higher percentage, and he landed 66 more power punches. Okay, landing on a higher percentage is a big indicator also. Now, on jabs, Jermell Charlo outlanded him by about 44 jabs, which is fine. But the standard of a professional fight is judged by power punches. And Castano had the more effective power punches. He landed 66 more power punches, okay? He exerted pressure the whole fight. That is another big factor. Now, what I believe the judges justify giving the fight a draw for is that Charlo hurt Castano 2 times. The first time was minimum, but the second time was actual. He actually hurt him. His legs buckled, and I think his legs were, kind of messed up. But Castano recovered very well, and he actually did excellent keeping his defense up. Now, Castano's amateur record is, I think, about 156 wins and 5 losses. So he's an excellent fighter. He's not going to just get knocked out. So the judges, I suppose, made their decision to sway the fight to a draw solely based off of that one punch that Charlo landed in the 9th round that buckled Castano's feet, and then consecutively after that, Charlo did not do anything to capitalize on that situation. But the judges used that, I guess, as a justification to give this fight a draw. Now, let's get into the scorecard of 117 to 111. I don't want to focus too much on that because that scorecard is a distraction from the real point of the draw. This fight could not have been a draw. It's impossible that this fight was a draw. I don't see 6 rounds that Charlo won. I would say Charlo maybe won 5. I mean, I wouldn't even say that. I would say Charlo won 4 rounds, but if I was generous, I wouldn't go to 6. Now, let's understand the story, the main purpose of this bad card. The main purpose of this card, 117 to 111, meaning Charlo got 9 rounds, Castano got 3. The main purpose of that card is to distract from the clear robbery that is a draw. Controversy is what's the driving purpose of that card. That card will change the narrative or take focus away from the narrative that the draw is a robbery and make you focus on the narrative that is the card. Okay, storytelling is very important to human beings. Storytelling is how we understand heroes and villains, is how we understand people in real life, public figures, how we see them. storytelling is how we rationalize and perceive the world. And the way that they have spun the story of this fight about that card and not about the draw is the real issue. The draw is the robbery. Castano, a fighter from Argentina, can't speak English. Maybe they don't think he's marketable. They see Charlo as a guy they've invested millions of dollars into, exerted as much resources as they can into him. They put a lot of money into him, put him into the finest facilities, gave him the biggest contract, give him a great salary. And this guy out of Argentina comes out of nowhere and just fucks everything up. It doesn't work in their favor. And I don't know if they explicitly tell these judges to do what they do or if it's a culture within that company, because PBC has a history of doing this. I call it PBC as a joke. I say public boxing corruption, but I digress. Let's not get into that. I don't know if they explicitly tell these judges to do this or if it's a culture that they create in that company that leads to these things being inevitably going the way they go. But PBC has a history of robbing fighters. A few fights that I can say is the Rolly Marinez fight. People feel that that was a clear robbery. The Barrios Akhmedov fight. A lot of people felt that was a clear robbery. Broner versus Santiago, where Broner won a round without throwing a single punch in the first round on every judge's scorecard. People think that was also a controversial fight. That was a robbery. These are all PBC fights. Again, we want to focus on that card. That card is a distraction. It is how they are focusing the issue away from the draw and making it about something outrageous and ceaseless and pointless. Let's keep it real. That judge probably didn't even watch the fight. Let's just keep it real. Now, aside from old media, which old media plays the old school games, which is they draw the narrative, how they choose to draw it. They change the narrative or drive the narrative how they choose. Let's get into new media. New media in boxing has become an issue where race has become so prevalent in new media that they are using race constantly to drive who they root for and who they don't root for. Castano is an Argentinian fighter. He's a foreign national coming to America, so I guess as Americans we're supposed to dislike him. Do you know how hard it is for an Argentinian fighter to make it out of Argentina and to come into the U.S. and compete at the level that he competed at against a guy like Charlo, a guy in the U.S. system, came up in the American system, which is the best system in boxing. Just the institutions that are here and the systems that we have in America, the facilities. For somebody like Brian Castano to come out of Argentina, I know that Argentina has great fighters and has great athletes, but still, for him to make it out of there and compete on the level that he competed on, it just shows that he's the better man. I'm not saying better than Charlo, but just a great fighter, period. Substantively, not all the extra, but just pure substance. When we break it down to pure boxing, the skill level that it takes to compete, like Brian Castano, it's a different level. So Sergio Mora said something amazing. He said to go to Texas and to draw means you won convincingly against Texans. To draw and get a draw against Texans in Texas means you won convincingly. I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. But another thing he said that was so sad is this will haunt Brian Castano forever because, this is a moment that was his and it was taken from him. I mean, 185-5 as an amateur. He also was robbed against Lara, but just a lifetime of work, and it's so anticlimactic. Only PBC would draw a fight of this caliber so that their fighter wouldn't lose. The only way that Brian Castano would have won that fight that night is if he knocked out Charlo, and that's crazy. They call him Iron Man for a reason. He doesn't just get knocked out. He has a high threshold for pain. That's what Tony Harrison said. That's the same thing they said about Ali. So you're not just going to knock out Charlo. He's a hell of a fighter. But Brian Castano was the better man that night, and that's just where that is. So I want to thank all the professional fighters like David Benavidez, who said it was bullshit on his story. I don't know if his story's still up. Andre Ward, who agreed that the fight should have went to Castano. Terrence Crawford, who said, Jermell, you lost that fight. And, I got a lot of respect for Jermell, but I got a lot of respect for Castano as well, who showed up. And I believe it was just his night. So that is the Boxing Republic, man. That is the first episode. I hope you guys enjoy it, man. I'm just getting on here, keeping it real with y'all. And I just want y'all to support, show love, man. I'm just going to be unbiased, and I'm going to keep it real. Like, I'm tired of the new media. There's always a lot of narrative-driven content, and I don't want this to be that. I just want to keep it real because I respect the fighters, and I hate the theatrics. I don't want boxing to be like WWE. I want it to be real, and Castano has an amazing story. So does Jermell. But I just want to keep it real. Thank you, guys.